My name is Peter Stockwell, and I am here with Guy Morris, who is the founder of Author Event Network. We have collaborated on several events over the last year, and we are now going to come into the BCAT studios and record interviews with authors, musicians, and artists, editors, and anybody else who is of interest to the public. So, I would like to introduce Guy Morris, author
Peter.
extraordinaire, and tell us a little bit about yourself, will you please?
I started off coming out of college in a business career, so I spent most of my last 36 years in Fortune 100 companies in executive and senior analyst roles, but I've always had a compassion, or not a compassion, but a passion to create. I believed when I went through college, one of the big inspirations for me coming out of college was actually understanding the men of the Renaissance. They were artists, they were scientists, they were politicians, they were businessmen. They believed that having a balanced life led to a better life. And so that inspired me. So even when I was working with corporate positions, I was writing screenplays, I wrote songs for Disney, I created webisode series, I earned a charter captain's license and went diving with sharks just for the adventure. And so when I retired, it was pretty clear to me that what I wanted to do in my retirement years to stay busy and productive and happy was to write about a lot of the things in the books, about all of the things I'd learned over those 30 years and pull them into a really fun narrative format. And so that's where I kind of started. So I started, after my third book, I decided to start Author Event Network. Because I wanted to be able to do a lot more events where I can engage readers directly, and that was allowed me to do it. But it's better if I do it with a lot of other people, not only from a financial cost perspective, but it creates a much more dynamic environment and pull at event if there's authors of multiple genres that a reader can speak to.
Yeah, there are times when I've been to writing conferences and they keep saying how lonely the writer's life is because we just sit there in this little cubbyhole or office or wherever it is, escaping from our public, because most writers are introverts. Now, having known you for the last couple of years, I have never figured you to be an introvert. I know I'm not.
I'm a closet introvert.
Are you really?
I spent most of my childhood basically in my room by myself. I went to 16 schools, so I was always a new kid. I've learned to be an extrovert. I learned to come out of my shell in corporate America where you're required to. You have to present. You have to deal with others. You have to deal with other groups. You have to create teams. And so it's been a learned process for me. I enjoy time by myself, but I'm also aware of the power of collaborating with others to achieve more. And that was one of the reasons why I started the AEN.
And it has worked.
It has
because
worked.
We have collaborated. You have brought in quite a few authors into this group, and we have done many events over the last year in which we meet our adoring public. Well, we hope they're our adoring public, and we ask you to come out and meet us because we do have some fantastic books. And so tell me, what is your favorite book? I keep getting asked that question, and my answer to that, I'll be interested in your answer, but my answer to that is the next one, because I'm working on it.
I'll always particularly answer somebody else's book. I love Dan Brown, James Rawling, Michael Crichton, Steve Berry, all of the great thriller writers that, especially those who are able to take real facts, real science, real history, and weave it into an incredible story and engage you. And so from my books, it's really hard for me to say. Each of them have a different tone and element. There's themes that run across all of them having to do with corruption and spirituality, but it's really hard to say for different reasons. Curse of Cortez was such a personal experience for me because it took me over a decade to research. I was on site to many of the locations in the Caribbean. I met several of the characters, including cartel lords that threatened to kill me, and seaplane pilots that were just incredibly daredevil. I was surprised that their planes could float, much less fly, and just the incredible people I've met. Swarm was one of my favorites for the reasons that it allowed me to really dive into all of the true to life, real aspects and issues having to do with artificial intelligence and political corruption in Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. And that one was actually inspired by a true event where I discovered that a program had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories at Sandia. Wasn't lost, wasn't stolen, didn't get broken, didn't malfunction. A program that's an NSA spy lab, so a spy program, escaped the NSA spy labs. And when I figured that out, my first thought was, holy cow. That's either somebody who's going to get fired for making a typo or somebody who's going to get fired because they said something they shouldn't have said. So I spent several months trying to figure out exactly how a program could escape an NSA lab, what it must have been designed to do that it had that amazing capability, and why it would leave. And then 2 FBI agents showed up at my door.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you think artificial intelligence is not supposed to be able to do that. And to have it disappear on its own can lead to quite a spy novel.
Well, the word escape was very evocative.
Yeah.
It implied intent.
Yeah.
It implied some kind of intelligence, and implied the ability to move itself and then erase its trail. That's an amazing set of capabilities. And so I said, what kind of program, what would the perfect James Bond spy program look like so that it had that amazing capability? That's like giving James Wan his little magic watch that could blow up a building or something, or do lasers in space.
Oh, wait a minute, we have those today.
We have those today. And so I was really looking at, it really got me involved in, okay, well, what are the technologies? Because I came from IBM and Oracle and Microsoft, so I was very familiar with a lot of technologies, and I was around architects and developers decades in my career. And so I had an understanding of what some of the capabilities were, but I hadn't really thought through, well, if I were a government spy agency, how would I want to use this stuff? And it really got me involved in trying to kind of get into their head to think, well, what would I want my perfect spy program to do? As it turned out, in 2016, there was a CNN reported story about how Russia had hacked the CIA cyber toolkit. And in that toolkit was virtually every single one of the attributes or programmable functions I had assigned to my fictional program that I was trying to figure out, including what we now call the deepfake video technology. So it was a really gratifying experience for me to get validated in terms of my analysis, but it really spurred me to want to write more about it and to really turn this into a narrative, a James Bond meets Indiana Jones meets Elon Musk kind of narrative.
Well, I do remember back when you contacted me, I don't know, this is right after Swarm had been published, and you were looking for some way in which to open up your market, and you contacted me for however you got a hold of me and such, and we met up in Paulsbo at the pergola up there, and we exchanged books, and then I read Swarm, and I said, oh my, this is an interesting book. And so we had fun from then on.
Yeah.
And I was really glad that you had contacted me, because it's always good to meet new authors, and
it really is.
Authors who have exciting material that readership should be reading.
Well, thank you, and I enjoyed reading your science fiction story as well, and that intrigued me. And I actually contacted you because I had seen a BCAT interview that was done under your previous group, CLAW, and I thought, well, maybe there's a chance for me to kind of get involved in this group and do something similar. And what I didn't expect was your invitation to go sell with you at Blackberry Festival. And the idea, I had done some book signings at Barnes & Noble's. They were relatively successful. I sold out books and then some. I had the back orders in one book signing. I had almost sold out in the second book signing. But those are very difficult to arrange on any kind of frequency where it makes a difference. Right. They're sort of one-off kind of events right after you publish, try to build a little momentum, but then it kind of fizzles very quickly. And I thought, well, this is great, but how would I do this if I wanted to go back and do this repeatedly? And I was trying to kind of figure out, in all of the experiences I had in business, I wasn't really the marketing guy. And so this was trying to learn to market and promote was a new experience for me. And that was an eye-opening experience for me. Not only did it get me past sort of the the typical author sort of snubbery, which says, well, I want to be at a nice bookstore and have people come to me. And I thought, well, moving past that unrealistic expectation, how would I actually go out and engage readers? And that really became a platform or a framework for me to say, well, that was a great experience. How would I go about doing this if I wanted to do this almost every weekend? How would I maximize this sort of channel in terms of meeting new authors, or meeting new readers rather, and engaging with my story and getting them to sign up for my newsletter, and then making good margins? And so that was the inspiration, was in meeting with you, for me to start the Author Event Network.
Yeah, marketing is the hard part. When I was first in this business, I of course tried to find an agent, get editors, and go to work and see what they'd say about my material. And what I found out is most people didn't want it because I was so new and so unknown, they weren't willing to take a chance. And so what I did was I learned how to actually put a book together, and I do my own publishing. So through my group called Westridge Art, and they have one irascible author with Westridge Art, and I have one terrible publishing company called Westridge Art. Oh, wait a minute, that's all me. But regardless of that, who does your publishing?
Well, I decided to self-publish as well. I had, like many authors, I had tried the route of trying to send out query letters to agents, which are very rare that you get them to respond, because they get hundreds of them a day. Very difficult to stand out no matter how good your book is. They're just trying to kind of go from a single page. But I was also, when I really looked at what agents and publishers did in terms of hiring editors, hiring designers, going through the process of producing a high quality product, I had come from, again, my background was such that I was used to putting big projects together, but hiring the best people. And so I said, well, gee, I can do that. And when I finished Cortez, I didn't get any agents. I wrote Swarm, I didn't get any agents, and it was actually my beta readers and my wife who basically said, these are really, really good books. Forget the agents, just figure out how to self-publish, do it right, and then get them out on the market, and then you'll build your own audience. And sooner or later, one of these days, an agent will figure out that you're viable, and then we'll come at you. And by then, you'll actually have a choice as to whether you really need them or not, or whether you really can kind of do it and make more money on your own. So I went the self-publishing route. But in doing that, I wanted to make sure I could hire the best editors I could. And so I went out trying to look for some of the best professional editors who'd been in the business for decades and years and knew what they were doing. I went out to try and find an amazing book cover designer, and I used readsy.com, which has professionals from all over the world. My designer comes from Cardiff, England. He's worked on thrillers for decades. He does an amazing job at coming up with very compelling covers. And I've seen at the events where posters of the covers themselves will pull people into the booth to start asking about the books. And that's what you want a cover to do. You want a cover to strike somebody's interest, to say, well, I got to know more about what this book is about. And so the production process I learned fairly quickly. You're perfected over time with finding the really good editors versus the mediocre ones. But again, as you said, it's the marketing and promotion that became sort of the amorphous cloud, fuzzy, you can't really grip on it and say this is what you need to do first, this is what you need to do second, this is who you go to for this kind of service. And when you talk to most authors and even most agents, they have some generic things that they think you should do. Have a website and do book signings if you can get them. But that's been the piece where I've started to say, well, I have to put my business cap on and start to say, well, how am I going to do this that I can actually get a rate of return? How am I going to do this where I can get noticed in the right ways? And that's been the steeper learning curve, is actually how to market. Now, to be honest, for the first 3 years, I did fairly little in that respect. I was really more focused on building a baseline read list of 3 to 5 books, and I've got the 3 done, before I really started engaging too hard in spending too much money on promotion and marketing, because I wanted there to be more than just a single book there when I was pulling people in. And so now that I'm at that stage, I think I'm actually spending more of my time trying to figure out how to promote and market. And so it's been a learning process, but it's not something that can't be done. And so it's actually been freeing for me to be able to know that I can guide it and manage that myself. And because my books deal with sometimes semi-controversial issues having to do with religion and politics and prophecy and history and technology and whether it's good or bad, it allows me to basically say what I believe needs to be said without having either an editor or a publisher saying, well, we want to be more middle of the road along those lines.
You're willing to take the risk of...
I'm willing to take that risk. And part of that inspiration was actually Dan Brown. Dan Brown wrote amazingly great books for many years, but it wasn't until he got to the Da Vinci Code where he kind of stepped on some toes from a religious perspective. Mm-hmm. Whether you believe that theory or not is irrelevant, but he approached it. He basically went there, and he approached that theory, which was very controversial with regard to Mary Magdalene and that whole line. And that controversy really propelled his books forward. Mm-hmm. And so what I found was that even when I tell people, and which was amazing for me, because many of the major reviewers like Kirkus and BookTrib and Book Life and Reader's Favorites have several times now compared me to Dan Brown. And in part because I take a lot of historical, real life, true issues, events, religion, politics in the background of the story, and then I build my fictional characters and plots on top of that. But also because I'm willing to go through, I'm actually willing to dive into some of these more controversial topics.
Now you mentioned characters. Characters drive a book. You can have the plot, you can have the background, the scenery and everything else, but it's really the characters who drive the book. How do you come up with them?
I pull from my own life. I've had the honor and the privilege of traveling all over the world. I've worked with generals in DoD, NSA. I've worked with CXOs at major Fortune 100 corporations. I came from a very lower class background. I was actually a homeless kid at age 13. I was a runaway. I was a worship leader in Venice Beach, California, and you can't get any more bizarre than Venice Beach. I'd like to see you try, but that's tough competition. And so I actually go through, and many of the characters in my books are based on people I've met along the way. And in the book Swarm, many of the characters that take place in the scenes in India, Hyderabad, India, came from people that I met when I was over there working actually with Microsoft. Many of the characters in Curse of Cortez came through me meeting people as I was based in Cancun and out through the Caribbean to research that book and enjoy my life with diving and other things. And so I like to build those characters on those people because I know them. I can kind of see them saying something that might be different or unusual or startling versus what others might say. And it allows me to kind of bring in a richer flavor where not all of the characters sound and look like me. Now there are characters that I think I build more of myself into. But
we all do that. Yes.
We all do that.
Yeah.
I try to build more. I try to have my characters very witty, certainly intellectual, certainly smart, and somewhat adventurous. But it's the sarcasm and sardonic humor that comes through, I think, the most.
So, do your characters ever talk to you?
My characters ever talk to me.
Because I know in my books when I'm writing, there are times when I have a plot that I want it to go a certain way, and I'll have a character kind of drive me in another direction.
I think I do have the characters sort of trying to define their own destiny in that sense. And now because my books are intricate in terms of multiple plot lines sort of weaving together in a very dynamic way, I found that I have to outline that a little bit before I get started.
Yeah.
I don't use the outline as if it's the end all be all. It's more of a framework that I build on. And sometimes the plot will change based on what's happening in that. And a lot of times it will be characters that basically, so no, that character wouldn't necessarily respond to that last event the way I thought he would or she would. They would probably go in this other direction, or they would have this other emotional response that I really didn't anticipate when I was just doing the outline. And a lot of times it's the emotions and the dialogue and the way that the characters interact with each other that becomes much more dynamic in the writing process.
So what are you working on right now?
I'm working on the third book in this Snow Chronicles series. And the Snow Chronicles series all deal with basically three basic themes. There's a sort of three themes that will go into each book. The first one is artificial intelligence and other advanced technologies, and more focused on how these technologies are becoming scary and how they're moving faster than our ability to control them either morally or legally. The second theme will always be political and religious corruption and how that interacts with the technologies that we have and the investments in the culture that we have. And the third theme will typically be a religious theme, and in this case, with this series, it's prophecy. Now, interesting, what I tried to do as a unique approach was the program that had escaped the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories has now become a character in my book. And I've taken that character just a couple of years ahead of where the commercial sector is, so that character's now reached a level of sentient singularity, which means that it's self-aware and as smart as a smart human would be. And that program, which I called Sylvia, Sophisticated Language Virtual Intelligence Algorithm, has now decoded end-time prophecy. That brings in a lot of issues with a lot of people have been feeling somewhat apocalyptic over the last several years with climate and COVID and economics and social issues and cultural issues and other conflicts. And so it allows me to really kind of pull in a really wide scope of issues into the series of books for the thrillers that impact people's lives today. And so those are the three themes of that book, and that's how I kind of always carry them forward.
So your latest book, The Last Ark, can you tell me about it? Tell our audience about it.
I think it's actually, for me, it's one of the more exciting ones. It combines some of the archaeology and ancient history and religion of the Curse of Cortez with some of the technology, AI, and politics of Swarm. And in Swarm, the AI program has decoded end-time prophecy. So for a lot of people, a third temple in Israel is part of that sort of expectation. So part of what I was doing within the story was looking at, well, what are the real-life events, what are the real things going on in the world that plausibly could lead to that somewhat unrealistic scenario for a lot of people. And in my research, one of the things I discovered, and the reason why I went with the title The Last Ark, was I discovered two arks, that there were actually more than one ark made. And that the first ark, which has been in Ethiopia, well documented with National Geographic specials and other documentaries, the Ark of the Covenant has been in Ethiopia for close to 2,600 years, or on its way to Ethiopia. What most people are not aware of is that in January 21, 750 men, women, and children, including the Guardian, were massacred trying to protect the Ark as it was being stolen and then sold on the black market. So the Last Ark will actually deal with a scenario of who might have wanted to buy it, who had the money and the power to arrange for such an event, and then how that will tie into a second ark. In the 1960s, there was a copper scroll found outside of Israel on the Dead Sea near Qumran, where all the other Dead Sea scrolls were found. But this was a unique scroll, not only because it was on copper, but because it had 64 locations where temple priests had hidden billions of dollars of temple treasures. And the last location was a second copper scroll that described where Jeremiah hid the Ark of Testimony made by Moses. This story is confirmed in Maccabees, Second Maccabees, but for many years people have been looking for these locations, but they were all looking in Jerusalem. About 6 or 7 years ago, an American actually decoded all 64 locations underneath the ruins of Qumran itself. And that was confirmed by an Israeli archaeology and antiquities group metal scan across all locations, confirming non-ferrous gold, silver metals in those locations. What makes it kind of interesting is that Qumran is part of the Palestinian West Bank. So Israel can't really dig there for political reasons, or they would lose all of the treasure, all of the second scroll, everything would go into a military warehouse, probably never to be seen again, reminiscent of the last scene of Indiana Jones. And so that was about the time that Israel started talking about a single state solution. That was about the time that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia started downplaying the relevance of the Temple Mount and talking about being willing to have an Israeli temple on the Temple Mount and wanting to have more control over the Waqf, which is the Israeli authority over the Temple Mount. And so all of these elements started kind of coming together to really kind of portray a potential peace deal. And so I bring in some fictional elements as well. I postulate that a former U.S. president who is under criminal indictment, but rather than refusing to go to trial, he basically flees to Saudi Arabia where he declares asylum, and he and the Crown Prince basically start up a new peace deal that turns into somewhat of a political theater. So underneath that, on the story, we'll see how the hero in the first story of Swarm is turned into a fugitive, but he has to save the life of the woman who turned him into a fugitive twice. So we're building relationships there. We find the professor who created this amazing AI starts his own journey and ends up, I won't tell you where he ends up, but he ends up basically on his own spiritual journey. And so we'll also deal with the solar winds hack and how that was probably one of the most dangerous hacks in American history and how it could potentially undermine our national security. And that was brought out by a RAND Corporation study that was sent to the DoD. So what you'll see in the last arc is a very contemporary mixture of events and real life things going on that carry through this great adventure between the AI and its group of characters, and how that will lead us through some spiritual and archaeological historical revelations.
Sounds like a very interesting book. Well, Guy, I want to thank you for what you have done and what you have given to us, because you're advancing a lot of the interest that would bring readers back to us. Mm-hmm. We don't have control of them, but we do want to engage them. Mm-hmm. And so thank you for coming in today. Thank you for founding Author Event Network. Thank you for letting me be a part of it. And I wish to thank the Bremerton Kitsap Access Television for allowing us to come into the studios today and record this interview. We are going to be broadcasting on Saturdays at 5 p.m. and you can see us as soon as we get this up for running. We will advertise that the show is on, and we'll go from there. This is a beginning for us, and we do thank you, the audience, for being a part of us. Have a good day.